Hello, everyone. Welcome to an all new episode of the Indic Explorer Show. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot to us. Now, recently we did a show on the educational system in India from the point of view of the NEP, the law coming into force, and what future horizons it will cover with Professor Desiraju. But taking that discussion further, uh, wanted to have a discussion further on the educational system in India and what challenges exist, and also in terms of how we can integrate our indigenous knowledge systems and keep them relevant for the modern world, and kind of develop the overall personality of young students. So, to have this discussion with me, I have the immensely opinionated, articulate, and extremely intelligent and a very good writer, Sagorika Sinha. Welcome to the show, Sagorika.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, Sagorika wrote an article, an opinion piece in First Post, titled a few weeks back, titled "Why Good Education Cannot Remain an Afterthought or a Political Gimmick." So, the crux of the discussion. So, I will be putting this link up on the show notes so you can read this article. Uh, but before we start there, because you are also a content creator and you've been the YouTuber journey. So how has your experience been like?
To be honest, I think it provided me a platform to get people that I found very. I was attracted to their opinions and thoughts and that articulation of those. It's just been a very nice journey. It's a very small platform. Thank you for mentioning it. It's a very small platform, but even so, people have been so kind. I've had the fortune of having people like the architect of the Vande Bharat Express in India, Sudhanshu Mani. I've had the former chief of RAW, Vikram Sood. I've had some very good authors, Shaunak Agar Khedkar, Arjun Singh Kadian. So many people. They've just been so humble. So yeah, I think my whole reason for having the platform at all is that otherwise these people would not be speaking with me, but now they do. So that way it's just given me a lot more access to such personalities that I admire.
Absolutely. I mean, being a fellow YouTuber, I can relate to it. It's almost like a visiting card, It gives
Yeah.
you access to people, and you're like, I have a podcast, so let's talk about it. And then you get to know them beyond their on screen,
Absolutely.
persona. So the discussion before the podcast or after it is
Yeah.
a lot more fun, I think. I mean, a lot of it doesn't go there, but yeah, I think it's been very enriching. So, I mean, good to have another YouTuber in this game. So,
Thank you. No,
yeah.
but I get that. Like we have 1 hour before that, 1 hour after that. I've sat at the computer for three and a half hours a day. So I recently realized that I should sometimes ask in between if you'd like to go for a sip of water, if you'd like to take a break for tea. So yeah, that
Yeah,
happened.
content creator occupational hazards. What can you
Right.
say?
Right.
Okay, so diving into the topic. In your article, you argue that education in India has been reduced to mere literacy, and also you speak about, the success in education being very linked to how proficient you are in a foreign language. I mean, I'm
Mm,
sure you're meaning English here.
yes.
So, what exactly could you elaborate on this in terms of what consequences does it have? This narrow approach have, and how do you think this hinders the cognitive abilities generally of the student and the learning?
Sure. So a few things. We know that for decades, knowledge in or purely the idea that someone has knowledge in English. For example, just from personal experience, we used to participate in spelling bees, quizzes, elocutions, and I was a very humble KV student. I used to compete against the more elite schools HPS, Hyderabad Public School, or Army School, things like that. Now, people came in and they used to speak even amongst themselves in English, and that was not the case with KVIs. We used to go on stage, do whatever we had to do, and आके बाद में हिंदी में बोलते थे नॉर्मली. तो और बीच बीच में जो भी लोकल लैंग्वेज है वो भी सीख लेते थे थोड़ा बहुत. बट we beat them pretty much. It was a matter of pride that we competed, but we also beat them. Simple thing, like somebody asked, one of the questions I remember was, well, how do you spell ophthalmologist? Now this is a very simple thing. If you're reading, then you know what that means. The girl starts off with AUF, and I'm like, ठीक है कोई नहीं जीत लेंगे. So and the quiz master was actually the spelling bee master was actually asking with emphasis on the PH. So she didn't actually ask ophthalmologist, which could have been confusing. She specified the ophthalmologist. So and the other students still do not get it. Now the thing is, if you're not reading in any language, even be it English, be it any other language, you do not develop a means to understand context and nuance. It's a very superficial understanding. Whatever videos we watch, whatever music we listen to, it's very, you won't remember unless the beats will be catchy, and that's when you remember. Or you like the visual appeal or something, you'll go back to the channel, but you won't remember what they said in the earlier episode. 6 Habits to Be a Millionaire, unless there's something that you've heard repeated across podcasts. Oh, wake up early, drink some water, read 10 books a week, things like that. You will not remember if it's something more pointed than that. Okay, read this book by someone, or things like that. If they're not, again, unless the reinforcement is there. All of our education system, from when we begin schooling until the end, is based on a superficial understanding. We typically don't pursue subjects with, until we have a story arc around them. And if we are to consider the more elite institutions that have come up in urban spaces, we have schools that allow for more practical experimentation, that do not enforce dress codes, all of that. You also have a new version which incorporates Indic knowledge systems, and they are more on the Gurukulam side. I know Vidya Kshetra in Bangalore is doing something of that sort. And those, I'm sure, they incorporate music, they incorporate dance. Now you can see that learning, that incorporates the physical, such as martial arts, music, traditional art forms, will always have a holistic approach, because it requires you to be mentally present. It requires a physical aspect, and you're constantly involved in that activity. It's not a one-way communication where a teacher is just talking at you and you must answer, you must listen to them, you cannot question, you can get things wrong and you will be corrected, things like that. Now, is this the only way? Absolutely not. There are so many schools, whether we go to Scandinavia, we go to Japan, there's a rootedness in culture. These are taught in their own languages. Nobody's made to feel inferior for speaking in Japanese. Nobody's made to feel inferior if they're practicing Tai Chi instead of I don't know, like warrior rhythm or something like that. So if you play a traditional Japanese instrument, you're going to be appreciated. There are whole villages, like we used to have the jatis. There are still villages that practice generations old tradecraft, and that comes because your schooling system does not deracinate you from your roots. So their knives are very famous. There's a Japanese village that produces the best knives in the world. There's brushes for painting. There's brushes that are handmade from horsehair. So all of these things are, even Indians will go there and pay a lot to get the best of the best, right? Because you cannot just surpass generational knowledge and think that a machine is going to produce the same thing. At least it does not have the same human sentimental value or the craftsmanship. There's no craftsmanship in the genetic. And I think we're all being made to be too generic. We're just, standardized to fit as another cog in the machine. Eventually, what happens is when we graduate, there are just a few options. So, people from the age of 12, 11, 12 these days, they put their students into IIT training centers or medical training centers. Everything is outsourced. Parents believe that once they're sending students to their schools, they have no more. And I get it, people are busier these days. There's just the whether it's an economic imperative or anything else. It's just people would prefer a more hands-off approach. However, then we have to demand more of our schools. When you go to other Asian schools, you have them preparing their own meals. You have them cleaning up after them. But when you go to India, people will look down. Some parents will look down upon such activities, unless they of course send their students to schools that where they're paying 3 lakhs per month for a first standard kid. Then they'll be okay. Oh yeah, look, my children are being taught how to bake cakes, or I'll send them to the Corner Blue or something of that sort. But the whole idea that they need to be trained in something, they need to have focus towards a particular aspect of life, towards a particular aspect of um, livelihood later on, that practical aspect is completely missing. It's still missing, despite all the conversations around it. It's missing. And language has a deep impact on this, because your cognitive develop, I can share links that you can put in the description box below. But not speaking in one's mother tongue, not speaking in more languages when younger, hampers the cognitive development of children. And yet, when I look at gated societies where I live in Bangalore, pretty much every gated society, you do not have parents speaking with their children in any language other than a pidgin English. Now, our generation does not necessarily speak good English. They're just exposed to it at a very basic level. If all the child learns is, come here, beta, don't go there, that's a dog, that's not enough. When you're speaking in your language, you're so much more comfortable that you develop much deeper thought. You know, ওখানে যেও না শোনা, ওখানে কুকুর আছে, কুকুর কি বলছে? So there's like lots of nuance, and that is not carried forward in a very transactional simple language that English is. Unless one is very well read in the subject, in the language, they're not going to be able to articulate with nuance. They will probably assume synonyms to be interchangeable, whereas they're not. They're context specific very often. So this is unhelpful. And once you have a grounding in your mother tongue, once you have a grounding in other languages, then English is not a problem. It should be learned as a global language, as a means of transaction in the international order of things, and it's a necessary language to understand. However, just the insistence on an accented English is not enough. At least it's not enough understanding that that is education. So.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of interesting points there, especially multilingualism. I mean, knowing three Indian languages, I can tell you, North, West, and Southern language, I can tell you how beneficial that is in practical daily life, and also cognitive ability, right? I mean, it's pretty much universally well known. The more languages you know, the better your cognitive abilities. Somehow, this is not a very important part of the discourse that you should know multiple languages, and Indian languages for that matter. Uh, but there's another thing you mention in that article, which is distorted, curriculums with a lot of bias, and sometimes especially with regards to history, the inaccuracies that are there in the textbook, and how, because at that young age, it shapes the way the child perceives himself or herself, as well as the world around. So, what are some of the examples that you can think of, and how big is this problem?
I think that's massive, but that's been such a political hot potato that, I'm sure at least our English speaking audience is somewhat aware of the more basic ones. But let me just, discuss something from a science perspective. Now, we study Niels Bohr's theory. Now people are like, why go back into history, right? Why are you tracking things that are dead? Let them be. Why do we keep needing to go back to Akbar or Shah Jahan, proving how villains they are? Now, if we have somebody like Ron Chen or Bors being discussed, is it too much to expect that we also study Indian scientists? I've never seen this in any other country, that being an argument that, oh, we already study foreign scientists, why should we study our own? That's never an argument. I've never heard that in the many. I've researched education a lot, but in no educational system have I seen anyone making the argument that we should not learn about people who participated in the sciences within our own country. So, and we have a rich history. We have many, many books to draw from. People may not be aware because these aren't promoted by any publishers. They're published at a very low, they're not very, the authors are not seeking publicity. They're literally just scribes making notes so that the knowledge of this history is not lost. At least we now know Sushrita, we now know Charaka. Now, these are now supposed to be Hindu nationalist icons. I mean, there are zero ways that you can go back and use that lens of presentism to something so far in the past. All we read about Aryabhatta is, okay, there's he just gave us zero. He was a mathematician par excellence. He has developed many theorems. Why can we learn about everybody else's theorems and not our own? We know about the Fibonacci sequence. A lot of people read the Da Vinci Code and remembered that. Fibonacci himself wrote that he got it from Indian sources. He has written that in his diaries. Now there might be an attempt to cover it up, but he never wanted to cover it up. Pythagorean theorem, he's written in his he journal that he got it from sources that were Indian. But we know them by their Greek names and their Italian names, but we don't know who the Indian scientists and mathematicians were. So that's not even a historic bias. That's a bias in terms of all learning. Now, when it comes to history as such, there are too many things that I would personally take issue with. It kind of started me on my journey towards many revelations because I believed a lot of things. I grew up with history as as my favorite subject, actually, because it told stories, and I always loved that. But then I grew up and I started reading, and I was always somehow interested in those that were lesser spoken of. So the Indian dynasties, they just compressed everything within one paragraph. So you had the Pallavas, Pandyas, Choras, and Cheras in the south, and you have the Vijayanagara kingdom somewhere, it'll be mentioned, and then you have the Magadha Empire, and these are so disconnected. You don't know how to make sense of them in terms of time, place. You'll learn about one aspect of their being, and that's it. So when I started reading about them, this whole thread kind of unraveled for me, where I realized that we were taught lies. We were taught so many lies that and nobody bothered with the countering. Now, you can't imagine that we've gone through almost a quarter of a century with this being taught to our children, and there's no agenda behind it. Like, why would you deliberately write about Indian dynasties or Indian history in a manner that is so inferior? We always see the only battles we see are the ones we lost. In fact, the ones we are not lost, we are told that we lost. Indians, at least indigenous Indians, are supposed to have lost battles that they actually won. No woman warrior queen is spoken about except Rani Lakshmi Bai, because there's a very, she was more recent. It was during the doctrine of lapse, during the British times. But we never learn about Naika Devi. We never learn about Rani Abakka. We never learn about the Ahom general Lachit Barphukan. We don't learn about anybody who was from the Adivasi community. Now, I come from an area where, Bhagwan Birsa Munda is very famous. He was actually converted to Christianity and he fought that off and changed back. I mean, came back to his roots because he was coerced into it and he realized that. But, these were not things that are taught. Why do we believe that lying to everybody, like this is the entire population, we're all part of the student of the former student population, right? So why are we teaching every Indian lies? What if somebody's going to ask that question in its very basic form, why are we taught lies? The answer is only one: there's a certain agenda, and that agenda plays out in the everyday life. We come out with people who have no interest in the country. We have no sense of contribution. We have no sense of involvement in society. I mean, we're completely okay with being a purely consumerist class, another cog in the machine that will probably strive towards personal fulfillment. And while that is absolutely appreciable, the basis of any social growth is personal fulfillment. They don't look beyond that. We feel purposeless after a very short while. And this is just the urban population. The rural population, I think, they go through schools, but I don't think they take schooling that seriously. The majority, they have to go into not rural populations, but let's say people who are from a different socioeconomic strata, whether they're rural or urban. I think they gain a lot more practical knowledge quickly. They're always participating in vocational activities that give results, and so they have probably more specialized knowledge, which is not the case when it comes to the urban students. They're much more protected from the real world experiences.
You mentioned about the trades, and I think I know that this happens in Germany that after a certain grade,
Yes.
students have to divert on two sides. If they are going into the technical white collar jobs, they kind of make that decision in their mid
Yes.
teens and they move towards that. And some students want to go into vocational, right?
Yes.
And it's a choice you make at that time. The Indian system doesn't really have such opportunities in that sense, right? There are vocational centers of training now, but it's not a conventional route. It's certainly not a route which anyone from the mainstream schooling system, any parent would want, or even a child, even if the child wants it, it will be, it's something that is fostered. And I somehow feel it has a little also to do with the fact that labor is a plenty in India. So the mindset towards the trades is a little, it's also a little bit of an issue. Like you can have multiple institutions, but if the mindset towards the trades is that, oh, ye thoda down market hai, then people will not go for it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I understand your question, and I have some experiences with the vocational training. My mother herself helped with some of them. She used to work as in several of these centers, and we've seen that in some when they were introduced first. I saw them in schools as well, and now the options offered. Now, see, somebody who's going through high school education is likely not, at least at that time, then their ambition is not to be a tailor, right? The options offered were very often like that. And there is no way that you can imagine what that business will scale to. That is not the kind of vocational training anybody else provides. There are options to do diplomas, and I think the NEP has mentioned a lot of these ideas. But what we need is an intent to foster entrepreneurship, and not necessarily the kind of bubble entrepreneurship that we see, that they get money from VCs, learn how to spend it, the product is the least important part, everything is marketing heavy. And that is something that, whether you're in school or college, these are the newsworthy items, right? These are the people being discussed. These are the panelists on shows. So you're not really creating an atmosphere where children have that option. How many things can we expect students to be exposed to, right? There's a limited capacity for knowledge. In fact, that's not a limited capacity for knowledge, but in the age of information, you just, if you get one sided information, you tend to think you know enough about the subject without seeking more. And that happens a lot because they imagine that the only way to be entrepreneurs is to risk everything, put in capital, pitch to VCs. There are some engineers, and I think people in IITs and the more elite engineering schools are granted a lot of freedom to experiment. but that must start sooner. I know we participate in all these talent hunt, talent search activities, but it was so useless because there's no path forward. Maybe somebody wins something. You don't expect them to know what to do with the winnings. So that idea, and it begins with teacher quality. You don't have anybody to encourage you. Nobody in the schooling system, there's no overhaul that's happened yet. So they're not really looking to encourage a student because they themselves don't know. A lot of teachers, they used to just find this a good way, and they earn well. And even in government colleges, teachers earn well. It was a way for them to feel independent, come outside the house and earn some money, and you know, that was it. I think that attitude, this is not to say there were not some amazing teachers. I've had the fortune of, encountering some just brilliant teachers. I know Ranjan sir was one, Nagi Reddy sir was one. There have been some people that really make an impact, but a lot of teachers don't care enough about the subject. They are not expected to be up to the mark. So, and the same thing is for vocational training. Like, if you're not encouraging a student, if you're not spotting talent, if you're not encouraging a student to, like, what stops you from finding a student who paints exceedingly well or performs exceedingly well in a music class and promoting them? Like, take them to the neighborhood Durga Puja or the Karwa Chauth festivals or whatever, and say that, okay, let's get you some money, because that's encouraging, right? Because when you're going through the schooling system, there are certain jobs that you're not ambitious towards. The trade schools that are present in the US, Germany, etc., they're very, very specialized. They're very specialized. Like, I was watching this interview of a woman who became a construction worker. She's not afraid of heights at all, and her salary, I think, tripled from what she used to make previously. Uh, it's tough. Now, yes, now, will it work in India? No, because our labor, when it comes to construction labor, is pretty cheap. But can something else work? Can somebody think of entrepreneurship as, urban companies started? They've aggregated all the people in the field, and I think the same thing can be done with coconut water. Can be done with standardization, like Goli Vada Pav did that with Vada Pav stalls. Any kind of standardization and aggregation can happen. So if a child actually just asks, why is this one like this and why is that one like this, can they put two and two together and think that, sab kuch ek jaisa ho sakta hai? Of course, they may not be able to start a brand, but they have the idea. Vocational training, now themselves participating in something like that. uh, you're right to the extent that labor is cheap. So it's not so much down market, it's the fact that there's not a lot of incentive, and people are looking at monetary incentive. It's either monetary incentive or social incentive. The idea with bad teaching is something. Look, I've been in schools where I've actually heard people discussing कि कितना दहेज मिलेगा. The government is starting uh, forest ranger ka some junior forest ranging forest officer, and they have a women's thing, so maybe उसमें जाएंगे तो दहेज कम मिलेगा. These are practices that belong to the, like,
Rate
no,
card.
yeah,
There
but
is a
when you
rate
don't
card.
belong to the elite
There's a rate card.
society, right, then you don't look at these things as something that happens in shows. This is real for them. They know that they will get married earlier, sooner rather than later. And when that is on their mind, they will look at how to best help their families out. Because why not? And so if they join this, perhaps they have to give less dahej or they get more dahej depending on what gender it is. And this is the idea that these schools do not take you out of the systems that you're growing into. And I'm not saying that they need to impose a parallel social system. I'm just saying that they need to provide more options than a child is used to, expand their thinking capacities, expose them to the world outside. This does not happen. Now, if somebody is forced to learn Tamil in, say, in Gujarat, then they're going to be much more open to watching movies in Tamil, participating in several Tamil-oriented industries, going to Chennai for work more easily and fitting in. And the same thing with people in Tamil Nadu. Like, there's so many industries in Gujarat, and people do go from Chennai to Gujarat. And, I mean, sure, we're Indians and we make do. It's just that when you're younger, you have a lot more, you're more daring, you can choose more opportunities. Language plays a major part in this. So, I just think that when it comes to things like language learning, when it comes to things like vocational training, there's so much more that can be done from a practical standpoint, which is not fleshed out. First, you need to think about it, and then you flesh it out. How do you implement these in the thousands, tens of thousands of schools in India? Now, some of what I know is that some colleges, when it comes to what we call PU, which is 11th, 12th, they connect in Gujarat when Sri Narendra Modi was the current prime minister, was the chief minister. I know that there were polytechnic colleges that changed their courses in accordance with what the industries around those areas were. That was sort of an initiative that happened. So if the employment offered was, required certain skill sets, then students came out with some of those skill sets. Of course, not all of them, but they were in alignment with real world necessities, right? Now, is that the only thing? Are we going out to be a cog in the machine? No, but it offers an option. It offers a practical option, because now either way, we're not learning any of the practical options. This was one practical option. So, and there can be so many organizations that can tie up with colleges to encourage this. So, I mean, we had guest lecturers from marketing industry, etc. But uh, these people were not. Again, these are not people involved with students. That's the thing. They get paid, and that's it. They get paid to come and lecture, and that's it. That is no way for you to understand how you can do better in a particular field, because teachers don't care enough. And I think that's one thing that I would really like to see changed. Unless there's a teacher overhaul, we cannot expect a student overhaul. Unless, and it's not just textbook oriented. Education is not textbooks. Education is experience. And that's not that. That's why I said it's only literacy. You know how to speak the language, you learn jargon from different things. And I think our math education is very good, which is why we have such great engineers. Cannot be better, sure, but it's good. But anything else, really bad.
Yeah, I mean, a host of things there. And you also touch upon this Indic knowledge systems. How do you think Indic knowledge systems can help in the all-round personality development? You did briefly touch upon the fact that you're taught different art forms and all of that. Uh, because there is one major challenge in that, which generally I often talk about it in the podcast. Uh, the interplay of tradition and modernity, because Indic knowledge systems thrived in a certain environment. They had the Gurukul system, which was very well entrenched, the Guru Shishya Parampara and all of that. Given the situation and the context of the modern world, and of course, we can't really completely go back to the past, right? Within those lived realities, how do you think we can bring the best of the Indic knowledge systems back?
um,
'Cause that's
I
the main
have
challenge, I feel.
a slightly different take on this. I don't agree that traditionalism and modernity are two vastly separate aspects. It's just we need to find something that fits the current society. That's all. You will never see a Russian asking this question. You will never see a French person asking this question. Are they not modern? Are they not traditional? How do you bifurcate these things that exist together? We are a people. Like, the question is only that are we going to fit into an anglicized, Americanized society? Is that necessary?
No, that's why I said interplay. It's not one or the other. It is actually kind
No,
of
I get it,
melding of
but
both.
the entire bifurcation is unnecessary to me. For example, somebody learning calorie diet too does not mean that they will not understand computer sciences. No. Yeah, so that's it. So the inculcation of whatever we call traditional knowledge systems, I just call them Indian knowledge systems, is now the inculcation of these in a context of the subjects is necessary. I will not say modern traditional. For example, for me, I think architecture is one love, and aesthetics actually in general, but we're also bothered by how ugly our surroundings are, because we are privileged enough to now come and discuss these things. But we are, our systems don't function. We live in urban messes essentially, and it's all ugly. Now when I go to Glasgow, I see that even H&M, Zara, nobody has those steel buildings that we have here, those cement blocks that are very tall. Now, do we need these for the sake of a larger footfall to be accommodated? Perhaps. But when it comes to the buildings that they function in any other country, they use the same traditional architecture that is suited to the place. They've not built things that stand out starkly and look ugly and don't seem to fit in. They're not grotesque. Now, that sense is not taught. When we go in to see architecture, we're only, again, this is my thing, like, why are we taught Niels Bohr's and we're not taught anybody who's Indian and has worked in the same field, right? And this requires us to think not in terms of traditional and modern, it just requires us to think in terms of Indian. This is our, it's not our history, it's our sciences. There are sciences, and it's just part of the global science fields of science, right? It just, you have Gothic architecture, you study Victorian architecture, you study Turkish architecture, and then you want to incorporate parts of it. Then you study colonial era architecture. Why don't we study sustainable architecture? Why don't we study Indian architecture? Why don't we study how the temples were made? They were made without stress on the structure. There's no mortar, there's no adhesive, and that's something that even Jaisundar mentioned on my last episode as well. The temples or temple architecture was an immense field. Like if you go to Badami, Hampi, Pattadakal, Aihole, you had architects first practicing in Aihole. Then you go on to, if you get better, you make those small temples in Pattadakal. And if you were the best of the best, then you went to Hampi. So this is the kind of vocational training that would make sense because you're specialized. That knowledge is specialized. You're not competing with a horde of people, for a single spot, which is the case of every opportunity in India at this time. We have such a large population. Do we think that we have no place for more jobs as such, more specialized jobs? Of course, that's not true. So the base has to be increased, and then we can come on to the education. So once, and it's not, I'm not really going to say something like, we only need to study Indian architecture. That's not my thing at all. When you say interplay of traditionality and modernity, I'll just say an interplay of local and global. And as such, both of these can very well be part of the same curriculum, right? We study Indian history in context of the world, like we don't, but we should study, like for example, there's a lot of myths that are created because we're not aware of the global context. Now, the same thing when it comes to architecture, we study patterns from everywhere, incorporate what is necessary. I think it's very necessary to also be sustainable at this time. We had somebody like, I forget the name, he's a very famous. Let me just check him out. He settled in India. He's a British architect who settled in India, and I keep going back to some of his work. Um, I think it would be very cool to see how very tall buildings are made in Indian styles, but incorporating elements from everywhere, but to make it sustainable and suitable to our places. Can the government incentivize such architecture? They should. Can we penalize architecture that is not sustainable and does not fit in? It's high time. It should have been done ages ago, but we don't. So these are things that can very well be practically implemented, but these are not even seeds of ideas in the minds of students, right? Like there's a lot of curiosity in a student, but what happens is they just go to school, come back, and leave all of those experiences. They socialize, and it shouldn't be stressful. It should be a joy to be studying, right? It
Yeah.
shouldn't be something they want to leave behind. That joy is not there.
Yeah, that's true. And like work should not look like work. Like studying should not feel like it's a
Yeah,
chore, like it's, I mean,
interesting.
somehow I think that is where the challenge has been, and it's become all about marks and getting the most elite college. The focus is completely on results, and Gita itself says that focus on the action, the results will come. I mean, that basic thing itself is lost.
Yeah, the people who made the textbooks do not read the Gita, so
I'm sure. I mean,
they are
that's
not people who read the Gita. That's
exactly.
why we
Yeah,
have
yeah,
them.
I'm sure, and I think that is also something that needs to be worked on. But the other thing that I feel is a big challenge with regards to Indian knowledge system or traditional knowledge systems, whatever you want to call it, is that uh, I'll just give you an example. Um I don't consider Indian, like, I won't use Indian as traditional and Western as modern. I don't use those synonymously because in Western also you can have traditional and modern. It's more about the time,
Yes,
right?
yes,
The
time.
problem is, let's say, for example, the Pallavas, they built a lot of temples in Kanchipuram, a
Hmm.
middle of the fifth century. The Cholas came much later, few centuries after that. When they were building the temples in Brihadishwara, they were not thinking that we are going to recreate what the Pallavas did. They said, we know all this. We are going to build Brihadishwara on top of it, something which takes us ahead, right? And for that, the reason they could do that, they could move that ahead, the needle ahead, chronologically speaking, architecturally, is because they already knew that and they were innovating on that. And the problem here is twofold. You don't know what is your traditional knowledge system, that chain is broken. So firstly, you don't know the ABC. So where is the question of reaching XYZ?
Hmm.
You know, how do you build on that? So uh, and that's the unfortunate part. Our current and the current generations are not building. It's almost like Indian knowledge systems frozen in time, and that's our
Hmm.
biggest loss. Not just the lack of
That's
knowledge
true.
of that time, but also not being able to build both those two things.
Right.
Yeah. So that and what do you think about the NEP? Like, do you firstly think it's a good document? How it is in terms of the overall, the outcome of it? Do you still see any challenges going on which are not addressed?
It's a policy document. I'd like to see it implemented. It's been 2.5 years. I do not, unless I see change in terms of the students coming out in terms of their accomplishments. For example, this is not related to education, but you've seen how the Padma Awards have changed. How they've brought the spotlight on so many things that the common person was doing. Like, who knew about Tulsi Gaura before she was awarded the Padma, right? There's
If I have to
people.
describe in one word, it's become a grassroots award. Like it,
It's become a regular Indian award for the Indian people, the way it was initially meant to be, but never implemented as such. So, unless I see that happening with education, that we have, like, we have millions of people. We have millions of people, right? These are people that are generally extremely smart. We are known to be hardworking. Uh, we're conquerors, and these are people that have no options. They're not made aware of their options. So, if every year there were 100 people coming out and, changing things in their own villages, and I'd love for them to not be co-opted by a Ford Foundation or a Carnegie Endowment or one of these places. I'd love for an Adani or an Ambani or somebody to take note of these, encourage them, give them seats, ensure that their dream of an organization spreads and they are able to incubate 10 more startups within their idea. For example, we see all these random things, like somebody's come up with making plastics from algae, or somebody's come up with systems that allow for, in the slums, if you put something in a water bottle, I don't know, it's not baking soda, some peroxide or something like that, and then you put it in a dark tarpaulin shack, But when the sunlight hits, it kind of lights up, like it magnifies the minimum amount of light to create a bulb like solution. So, I mean, I would never want someone to have that much poverty. Of course, the idea should be its eradication, but can the student be encouraged to build more, to explain the sciences behind this, use more science? Can they be encouraged in any way and create something that allows them to think in those solution oriented directions? We talk about problems too much. I think Indian society is very problem focused and not solution oriented. So, to be practical, I think it's very necessary to look outwards. And for me, that's my only, like, I've read the NEP. It's a 66-page document. I think everybody should at least read it. It's got some very good ideas. I appreciate it because good people have worked on it. People with a lot of knowledge in the system, people with who have, they've got experience with pedagogy building and study as such. But what happens now? It's been 2.5 years, right? I have not seen like the textbooks change, and the issue with education is that it's part of a concurrent list. Nobody can take a centralized decision on it. I mean, even NCRT textbooks have not really undergone change. Whatever change has it has undergone, it's been very contended, and it's not something that most common people will actually understand. Because why? Look, I don't agree that Richard Dawkins or somebody like that comments on how evolution is not part of our school thing. But the thing is, he should probably look at his own backyard first, because education, I mean, this is an American speaking, so I don't really know how he can have the courage to say something like this. However, I myself would wonder that, okay, I get that it's not been removed. It is part of our school curriculum, but it's not advanced study. Evolution is not advanced study. So, I mean, we understood it. We were taught JBS, Haldian's hot soup. All of that was very, very interesting at that point. You understand the history, the basic biological history of humans. At least you have one theory that is complete at this time. So why not have children younger than 14 learn it? But that those are the things. It just creates this whole strange political debate, which is completely unnecessary. I focus on things that you already know about. Remove the Aryan invasion theory. It's been discredited by multiple people who worked on the Aryan invasion theory previously and then came to the conclusion that it's untrue. No archaeological evidence supports it, nothing like that. So remove it until you are sure of it. There's no reason to use it, because all it has helped with is to create political divides between speakers of a certain language, between people who have a certain skin color. You can see how racist it was. So, something that is so dangerous, so harmful to the psyche of students, just remove it when you yourself don't know about it. But, we don't do that. We instead talk about. I don't know the periodic table. At least that was a controversy generated out of nothing. That's not even true that the table exists. But yeah, I think the politics should be removed from education, and that's why my article and NEP does not play into that. NEP, I think, is a good document. Everybody should read it. I just don't know when it'll be implemented. That's why I think it's like one step forward and two steps back. What do you want us to do with the fact that you've come out with a document? You mean to show it to the teachers, ensure that they are educated in the way you want them to be, na?
Yeah, matlab, this is a big problem implementation. Like there is this SOP manual that the cops have as to how, when someone comes to file an FIR, what they need to do, what they don't
Oh,
need to do.
yes.
And that manual is so complex. It's beautifully written,
Right.
but will an average cop be able to learn from it and execute it? Execution is the problem.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
there's a very interesting point you mentioned on communist revisionism of history, and
Hmm.
how do you think the education system can play a role in countering such narratives and fostering a sense of national identity and also acknowledge Indic culture?
Again, I think India is very unique. Now, I have not studied African, some post colonized African countries. That is left for me to do. I am certain that Pakistan, Bangladesh, which are also post colonial nations divided from India, they don't have this kind of education that we have, that is essentially creating an anti-Indian narrative. Instead, theirs are full of, their textbooks are full of falsehoods. Especially, I know about the Pakistani history that is written, it just revises history to a point where it is laughable, but you also remove logic from the students, so you can't have expect them to do the laughing. But from the outside, at least you can laugh at them, because the proof against all of it exists, right, in all of the archives that are maintained. With regards to India, now, how can we do the same thing to us? Like, we're literally copy pasting their methods, except to show us, at least they're doing it to create a sense of pride, they're doing it to create a sense of supremacy. How can we justify that we do it to show ourselves in a light that is inferior? Why? I mean, Romila Thapar has herself said that this was an agenda based thing. This was done in order to maintain communal harmony. What do you mean? Are you saying that children will go and create riots? What exactly is the idea? So, as such, the countering of communist revisionism can only be done with an overhaul of the education system. There's no other way. One, the education system, of course, needs to undergo an overhaul, but the communist narrative needs to be reformed through, needs to be addressed through textbook revisions. Just the easiest thing to do. I don't know if you've looked at textbooks, but NCRT, I actually started revising the, just pointing out all the things that were wrong in the history textbooks across the NCRT, because those are easily available online. So I just downloaded them and I was like, yeah, it's so easy to correct them. It's not a lot of information. It's actually not too much. So a one page will probably fill up three or four. One Word doc will probably be equivalent to 3 or 4 pages of that history book, and it's very easy to correct because all of these falsehoods, for example, um, one thing that I think is very something that the communists have done well is to cherry pick data, put them out of context. It's something that everybody in the information age is very used to, so they don't see anything wrong with it. Now, Sati is portrayed as a major aspect of Hinduism and a major flaw of the religion, and you are in today's era made to feel guilty about it. Again, I mentioned that no warrior queens are discussed. Why? When we have records of this and you want to call us, now you also don't mention the prostitution rings that exploited minors started by Christians, the missionary activity involving sexual exploitation that was done. You mention none of that. You don't I noted that the khankas were finally mentioned. We, the Sufis that um, were invested in conversions, in Islamic conversions in West Bengal, etc. They had brothels where minors and women were brought, raped, and converted, made pregnant. These were called khankas. Now, this is not explicitly mentioned, but the mention of khanka was there, which kind of made me feel a little better, because these are things that need to be called. Are we blaming modern Muslims for that? Are we blaming Muslim children? No. These were things that have happened in the past. Now, Indonesian Muslims embrace an Indic culture, but Indian Muslims will not. It is a Muslim government that has made the Garuda in, sorry, that has the Jatayu statue in Bali. Their airlines is called Garuda. They are very proud of their ancestry. Their currency is called rupiah because it's the silver, the word for silver in Sanskrit, rupiah, and they, you know, but Indians. There's a movie. There's an Indonesian movie. I can't pronounce it. It has Ghatotkach as its name. It's such a nice movie that derives from. They are the descendants of the Pandavas and the Kauravas, and that's the storyline. It's a superhero movie in Bahasa, but it's available on Netflix. But they're the ones talking about in the culture, and Indian Muslims are incapable of that. Are you saying that they are brainwashed or they are radicalized from the age of what, 3, 4, 5? That's wrong. That's
Absolutely.
such a horrible way to look at children.
Yeah. Absolutely. In
Uh,
fact, I mean, we should give them more credit for it. In fact, if they have not been given a chance, if the content and the syllabus is presented in a nuanced way. See, the challenge is that, no, to be able to present everything in a matured fashion and it, not glossing over history basically, actually comes in the way of genuine healing. I actually feel the reverse. What do you think?
yeah, I mean, my thing is that nuance, etc., you might think is too much for a child to understand. Simple thing. You have the Gurkhani Empire. Nobody called them Mughals. It's a later word. They were the Timurid. They were Persian, Turkic. They did not look Indian. They did not speak Indian language until much later. They did not marry Indian women. These are foreign invaders. They came in. They were radicals, and they are very different from Indian Muslims. Now, did they, were they horrible to the population that they conquered? Yes, in keeping with the, and I mean, imagine this is just a, people are very proud of the Khan surname here. You know what? That is a remnant of why are there no Khans in Turkey? Why are there no Khans elsewhere in Dagestan? Because Khan is a Mongol surname. When they went to Turkey, Khan just means it's like Deshmukh Patel, just chieftain, Sardar. So you went to Turkey and essentially killed all the Muslims there. But you were the elite, so you were looked up to, and so the Muslims, when they gained power, they still took the epithet of Khan. And then when they came to India, some of them still used it. That's why it remains. But it's a Mongol surname that essentially exemplified the destruction of Muslims. But it's the Muslims who wear it with most pride. This is nuanced history, and you can see how it's not black and white. No Muslim associates the surname of Khan with somebody who's destroyed Islam. But that is true. Now, do we want to force it upon them? No, it became part of Islamic culture at some point. It became part of the subcontinent's Islamic culture, at least. ठीक है. Are we expecting people who behave like this to not understand that, okay, these were people who were invaders? This is how people were converted? Yet your ancestors were brave. This is how they resisted. This is how they fought. And you are Indians. We are constantly told that the indigenous Indians, the indigenous people of the nation, were losers. We're constantly told that, okay, these are the battles you've lost, like the Battle of Haldighati. Now they're revising it now, saying that, okay, Maharana Pratap actually won, and Akbar expressed his deep admiration for him. And all. What did we learn? We were told that he lost. He died there. He never died there. तो आप लिटरली झूठ बोल रहे हो यार. So communist revisionism is essentially revisionism, right? Well, it's an agenda that is accepted by people who wrote it. My thing is that this is the government that apparently stands for Indian values and virtues. So why is, an indigenous people expected to not discuss this, to not expect change in something that affects them so deeply?
I actually have an answer to this. The answer to this is the tyranny of the unelected, which is the
True.
bureaucracy and the people who actually,
Bureaucracy.
and they are not getting removed from power in like 5 years, right? So that's where the problem lies, in my view. And of course, the bureaucrats have a lot of power. In fact, more so in this than the previous government. So actually, that makes it even harder to change.
Maybe, but when there is will, you find a way. There's a lot that this government has accomplished, but somehow the youth of the country has been their last priority.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm happy in terms of security and economy, and very, very grateful actually that we've gone through the pandemic, but come out much better than a lot of the other countries in the world. But this will always remain a sticking point with me because it's something that molds the minds of millions of people every, you know, you can't have a top down approach here. It has to be both. Now, finally, you have movies like Kantara and RRR. That really affects thinking. It'll make people look for things. But does that mean, how do you come back from something like that, but then come home to a child saying, Mama, I want to be Shah Jahan when, we have the fancy dress competition? What do you tell them? अब बना ही दोगे ना शाहजहां.
Yeah,
दारा शिकोह के बारे में आप सिखाते भी नहीं हो. अशफाक उल्ला खान के बारे में एक लाइन है आपके पास, है ना. And one other thing with history is that it stops. Like, इंडिपेंडेंस के बाद it does been a quarter of a century, उसके आगे पीछे कुछ हुआ ही नहीं है.
correct.
मतलब ऑलमोस्ट 100 years हो जाएंगे तब आप बोलोगे कि हमारी हिस्ट्री वहीं पे रुक गई है. So that's there's so much that has happened. There's so many people after that. You don't discuss the naval mutiny. You don't discuss Muslim icons that have
Contribute.
Indian Muslim
Yeah,
icons, right? Even artists like Ustad Bismillah Khan, who was a Saraswati
yeah,
Pasak. He has been very public about it. And that's an Indian Muslim, and this culture still exists to a very small extent. There's been a lot of money that's been pumped into radicalization, but for adults at least. But the other day, I met an old gentleman on the street selling Iktara ka local version. Call it the Indian coconut violin, handmade by him, and his name is Fakhruddin, and he played some tunes on it in Tamil, Telugu, Hindi, and Kannada. And he could play it in 4 languages. That was his livelihood. That's all he did. He learned it from his father. There's no money in the family, so you couldn't really join a gharana or anything. It was intergenerational knowledge again. Learned it from his father, handmade these instruments, and said, Ye Saraswati Devi ki den hai. That's why I play it. That's his life. There is no question to that, right? Is this a bad value for an Indian Muslim to learn? Like, why is assimilation the job of one population and not of the other? So, but also, my thing is not even the later situations that arise. I don't believe that children are going to, you know, start unless you make them feel victimized, they're not going to have these questions that adults impose on them. We've seen what happens when you politicize this, right? You had the hijab controversy recently. It's not the hijab, frankly, it was the abaya controversy. It's a misnomer that's used, the burqa or the abaya with the niqab. So it wasn't the hijab. I don't think hijabs are anyway forbidden in most places, but yeah, this is what happens when you politicize the most basic structure of society, which is education, of civilization, of society necessarily. But we call ourselves civilized because we aspire to more, we aspire to the future, and we aspire to a civilizational history, we aspire to a civilizational future. Are we saying that 20% of the population is not going to be part of it if we include uh, real history? That's infantilizing an entire population and looking down upon their intelligence. It's disgustingly racist in a way. So I definitely don't subscribe to that idea, and that's why I think it's extremely necessary to have an overhaul.
yeah. I agree with you on the last part. The infantilizing part. I think that's quite ridiculous, to be honest. Uh,
Hmm.
there is a very, very, in fact, interesting point that really stood out to me in this article, which was where you mention that the mental well-being of students is particularly affected, as it's a significant concern in the age of information load. And how so what I was wanting to know is, how do you think an educational system can address this challenge, in the sense that how do you develop critical thinking and the ability to handle complexities in this information overload?
I've been thinking about critical thinking for a long time, and it's hard with when we're dealing with younger people. It's very easy. There are some points. One is casual indifference is very necessary. Slower reactions are very necessary. And what I mean by these two is when you have casual indifference, you have a perspective. I have a different perspective. Perhaps both are accurate in their contexts, but we don't agree in that moment or that time. We just feel like, okay, we don't need to say something as annoying as, let us agree to disagree here, but it's just they exist in different contexts. So we accept that, okay, it's a different perspective. And I see it on, you have these podcasts and I have mine. We're talking to people so many times. It's not like we agree 100% with them. Do we decide that, oh my god, I can't believe he said that, god, he's so whatever, bigoted, annoying, whatever label you want to impose on somebody? We don't do that, right? We have so many perspectives. Why is that happening? Because when we talk offline, I'll probably be talking over you, you'll talk over me, or whatever. On this channel, there is a pause to reaction. We are behaving with propriety, and when those boundaries are crossed, when it comes to students hanging out together, we kind of let that go. Or having a social media platform, you're talking at people, that's very dangerous. There's very little interaction as such. If you don't agree, then you don't agree, everything. And algorithms always promote negative sensationalism. So these are things to be very aware of. Now, how much do you like, if I'm aware that, look, I go on to Pinterest, not Instagram, I design boards because I'm interested in a few arts, I like interior design or fashion or whatever. That's, that is consumption with some intent. We don't consume with intent. And critical thinking capability will always be impacted by that. From a student perspective, the easiest way to ensure that these are, practices that go on is meditation. Mental health is an immensely important aspect of younger children today. And it's very, I see babies that have been given iPads. भाई कितना कम समय है आपके पास, आप बिना स्क्रीन के सच में नहीं खिला सकते हो क्या? मतलब, were our parents super powered or
I
something? I don't
sometimes
know.
wonder that if is it the millennials who think like this, or is this because we didn't grow up? So we did have social media. We were part of the social media boom, but we didn't grow up when these things were there,
Huh.
right? I somehow feel this is going to affect mental health. It affects the mental health of adults, यार. मतलब Instagram में आप रोज देखते हो colored, filtered stories जो सच है ही नहीं. शायद उस पर्सन ने मैनिक्योर करके उसको प्रेजेंट किया है, वो सच भी शायद नहीं है. यह एक पार्ट ऑफ दैट ओवरऑल रियलिटी है, और उसको हम पूरा सुपर इम्पोज करके वही सब कुछ है. ओ माय गॉड, व्हाई आई एम लाइक द होल थिंग ऑफ फोमो. आई मीन, इट्स गोना लीड टू डिप्रेशन.
One other thing is screen time, right? Increased screen time, and I see a lot of schools moving towards having only tablets. It's very detrimental to mental health. The way the brain processes videos, the brain processes screen aspect versus how it processes books, text. And somehow text kinda it's distracting on the screen. I don't have enough research about this, but I do have research about reading versus video. The way it affects the brain is very different. In the case of text, it's generating imagery. You will continue to think in terms of images the way humans initially did. When it comes to videos, the image is already there. You tend to think in words. Your thoughts happen in words. When it happens to children, in fact, it happens to adults. Now, I think everybody thinks in terms of words. It restricts imagination immensely. You're not generating anything. You're not able to think ahead. You're not able to create scenarios. You can't even visualize an ideal world except in form of an Excel sheet like thing. So, I mean, you'd need an external vision board or something. You'd need an external picture to validate your ideas, but you can't imagine it yourself. How, even I think Albert Einstein was somebody who said that imagination was his greatest tool. If you can't imagine it, how do you reach it? Imagine a child being restricted in terms of thinking like that. So screen time is very, very, very detrimental, and I see parents more than schools, but also schools forcing it upon children. Just it's attractive. And if you don't want children to be looking at the screen, then it requires parental sacrifice. You have to be away from it. Children do not learn through teaching. Children only learn through example. The reason that some children are quieter than the others is because in their homes parents are not shouting at each other, or otherwise they are unsocial and reading or escaping it somehow. But usually if they are well adjusted and quieter, well behaved, it's because the parents are, right? If you grow up in a certain situation where everybody's screaming at each other, you tend to also look for attention. So, I mean, some children do that, they go through those phases, they'll pass out of it, but these are things that affect mental health. And as you grow through the schooling system, you have so much external influence, you create an identity crisis for yourself. Now imagine आप घर पे कथा हो रही है, आप पाठ कर रहे हो, and then you tell your neighbor or your classmate कि हाँ, oh my god, ये भी होता है क्या? And जगरात्रा, यार, why do you stay awake at night? It's very bad for health. And you'll start thinking in those terms. Then, if you're not wealthy enough, but yeah, my parents got me a PS5 for my 10th birthday. 10th birthday पे PS5 जरूरी है, but apparently है. So ठीक है. Like honestly, I have um, earning friends who wanted a PS5 could not buy it because it's too expensive. But
Wow.
you have parents indulging their children like that. See, I'm not against children experiencing all things. If you are wealthy, please do. It's just that there has to be a threshold that needs to be defined, and parents have to think about it. I Again, this whole outsourcing to schools is not something I agree with, because, like I said, I see children being spoiled by the parents a lot. Like spoiled in the sense mental health wise, right? Around me in this society that I'm now staying in, not in Bangalore, in Pune, everybody, the board exam results were announced. Everybody scored 88, 95. The girl who scored 96% has given her exam papers for rechecking because the cutoffs are so high, and she knows that she should not have lost any marks in science and maths, and she's lost 2 marks in each. So yeah, she's given her papers for rechecking. तो उसका मिठाई नहीं आया. बाकी there are four kids, जिनका, they're all in the 88s, late 80s or 90s. They've gone to Japan to celebrate it, which is great. I appreciate the exposure, but I'm just saying that इतना pressure कि 90 से कम, and
Seriously.
they were forbidden to not talk to neighbors. They were forbidden from
Yeah.
interacting with people, going out. uh, how do you expect them to suddenly adjust themselves when they grow up?
Yeah. That's true.
They come with so many wrong ideas and a lack of practicality, and they are all preparing to go abroad. As soon as they clear their 12th, they will go abroad. This was the 10th. They are all in the 10th standard. They will all go abroad because that's the dream that their parents have. And the other day, there's this 27-year-old girl, in Indian girl, who went to London to study. She was stabbed to death by her Brazilian housemate. These are things that parents are not aware of. Like, you just think that, oh, there's we are going to have utopia because my child will graduate from Stanford or Princeton or Dartmouth. um what will they graduate and why do they need to go there? Can they have other options? These are not options made available, and that's the fault of the schooling system that existed in their time but also in today's era. If a student were encouraged in some way to participate in things here, they would probably not feel the need to go abroad. And that is this obsession of trying to fit into a global world. Again, if you were to go abroad, come back and contribute with whatever you learned, that's great. And I will say that the Chinese, the Turkish people, when they send their students to the US, they send them on scholarships. They are completely oriented, grounded in what they're supposed to do. Here, you have Infosys and Adani and all these endowing chairs. They have no idea what happens to those students, and they give these endowments to non-Indians often in random schools, and they are co-opted by another Soros Amityar Ford Foundation people that essentially act as Western sepoys, using their race as or their skin color as the basis for whatever they want to say. So we have no strategy in place now. schools don't do this. Can I expect that the MEA or insist that okay, we will blacklist Rutgers because it's genuinely an anti-Indian university? Uh, no, we will not do that. Can we teach? Can we have a 1 week orientation course where we warn them, hey, if you find anything that is anti-Indian, that is anti-Hindu, if you're being harassed, let us know. If you are participating in something that is uh, you know wrong, that is illegal, that is say if you are caught sexually harassing, you will know that we will not give you any visa assistance. Can we impose these things in place? Can we warn people? We don't do anything. On the other hand, all the other cultures, they send their children abroad in order to assert themselves, their presence in those nations. We send them from a particularly selfish perspective, and that remains from childhood until adulthood, until we die. So there's no sense of community, there's no sense of Indianness, except in the most super, हाँ हमने दिवाली मनाया, क्यों कलरफुल कपड़े पहन के गोरे लोगों के साथ
फोटो
डांस
खिंचा
किया.
लिया, एग्जॉटिक बता दिया
हाँ,
कि बहुत
अरे
एग्जॉटिक
मस्ती
है,
करने.
बहुत एग्जॉटिक है,
हाँ,
प्लीज देखो.
exactly.
ये
Right, right.
कल्चर है.
You fetishize their exoticism, and you play to their fetishes. That's it shows a lack of self-esteem, right? Cultural self-esteem. So you're completely deracinated, and that's a function of everything, but essentially education. And education actually has to. So once you say you meditate all throughout your school life, but then you go into a hostel or you go into a different city, how do you ensure that that continues? Like the Japanese, again, you have Tai Chi played on the radio. You have the older people coming out. Like their society is not ideal. I'm not suggesting that. It's just that they are, there's been a lot of influence, American influence as well. It affects Japanese conservatives as well. But you have the radio playing the every day, the Tai Chi entire flow of it happens. You don't have a yogic meditation that's playing over every radio channel here. That's so old fashioned, that's so ew. That's so Hindu nationalist. I don't know whatever is negative, but you chipkow it on anything and call it Hindu nationalist, then gone. You will not do it. But there's no way to carry it forward, right? So unless parents are involved, unless they care, I don't know if they care enough because they're busy in their own lives. This is not to disrespect parents. I think after a certain while, children should also, take cognizance of what is necessary and do things. It's just that every parent is struggling in their own sphere, and they're not made aware of these things. They've probably struggled in certain situations and they just want to live life as freely as possible, and then be encumbered with teaching children outside of their schools might be a little too much for them. But it's not fair to the children. So I don't blame parents solely for this. After a certain point, it is everybody needs to take cognizance of
Yeah.
their own behavior and see where they want to go. However, it is made easier by parents who are more rooted, who are not seeking to. And I don't think this is the majority. I think this is just a very elite privileged class in urban areas, which is not the majority of our population. Why this is worrisome is that more and more people are coming out of extreme poverty. More and more people are engaging in urban behavior, whether through the dispersal of information through the internet or otherwise, right? And what do we see? We see out of context behavior, like children on Instagram being sexualized, gyrating to, uh, dancing to very
Item numbers.
sexualized
Yeah.
music. So, it's something that parents, I mean, who else can tell them, right? And I think shame is a valuable tool, social tool, but it's not used appropriately. So, but yeah, these are all part of. That's why I said literacy is not education. Do we not think that this is education? How to behave in society, how to behave on social media, how to behave in certain places? Is this not education? Is it only a means to livelihood?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's a lot of things packed together. The institution of family itself, joint family system is now going towards nuclear family. So a lot of the roles that the older generation was playing, nobody's there. Like I make this, I have used this line, the case of the missing grandparent, you know,
Hmm.
that is missing from the family. So I mean, there is a lot there. But do you see something positive as a future outlook coming out? Do you see that, like you said rightly, the demographic shift towards urbanization seems to show that this will increase? Do you see something good, some light at the end of this tunnel?
I can hope that more by the time we have a better economy, more equitable and better economy. I would only hope that the education system also betters itself to incorporate Indianness into it, so that this growth is more sustainable. This growth is more Indian in nature. However, the way things are going, I am a little hopeless. Maybe that's because I know people who are working in the Indic knowledge space and systems space. Sorry, I know people who understand the urgency of educational reform. Eventually, the buck stops somewhere, and that is with the government. Unless there is an overhaul of systems. And look, we can discuss how, the UP government has done really well in this regard. Nobody talks about the school changes there. The midday meal scheme brings children from, to their homes. There are great toilets for girls. That is one of the major reasons girl students drop out, which is, there's no adequate sanitation for women, for girls. Now, the UP government has midday meal schemes that include fruits, that include protein rich foods that are essentially very wholesome and nutritious and good for the body, that gets students to come to school. They've built computer labs and I think even astronomy labs, but they've done very well. Uh, I think Andhra Pradesh had previously done this, also not to this extent. They've been doing this for a while, but there are some states that have managed it. Who standardizes it? It's like, we can't keep screaming that India is one nation while we actually don't treat our students as one. Some are entitled to more, some cannot be entitled to less, right? So there has to be some measures that are undertaken. Are they going through the same NCRT syllabus? Even with state board, is it okay to portray Tipu Sultan, who, due to who villages don't celebrate Diwali in Mangalore? Is it okay to portray him as a hero because he's Muslim? Can we not portray the Arashiko as a Muslim hero? That's not adequate reason, right? Yet you make it political. And so unless there is a concerted effort, concerted will towards this, I'm not sure if it will change, and can only hope, but I don't know.
Well, on that very pessimistic note, usually we end this podcast on an optimistic note, but at least we'll have some hope as optimism here, that hopefully something will change, and
Right.
so many lacuna that are there in the system will eventually get corrected, and we can create a great future. And also the education system as well contributes to the nation building process in that sense. But
Absolutely.
yeah, so with that, we come to the end of this podcast. Thank you, Sagorika, for this very enlightening conversation. It was great to have another fellow YouTuber in this journey on the show, and a lot of relatable issues I'm sure we discussed about offline as well. But it's great to hear from young voices like yours about these social issues. So good to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Vineet.
Okay, guys, with that, we come to the end of today's show. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, see you around.